Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well today. So my upline came to me today and he was basically having trouble with breaking down in the most simplest way how to explain what we do and how to do it to new sponsors, right? To business owners, not just customers, right? So we kind of went through it all and we managed to simplify it to four basic parts, right? So in the business, there are four basic things that if you just do them on repeat, then you will have success, basically, right? So before I get started on that, basically, I think I've gone over this before, but I'll just touch on it now. You have three lists, right? So your A list is family and friends, right? These are basically the point of the lists is 1, 2, and 3. It gets gradually more uncomfortable to talk to them, but you will gradually get more successful with the A, B, and C list. So the A list is family and friends, right? So those are people to kind of get you over the initial hump and get you started practicing showing the plan, right? But a lot of times family and friends don't necessarily get in, right? Because they see you as a particular way. I've talked about standard setting before, and in a lot of cases, family and friends kind of have this preconceived standard of who you are, and usually it's not a professional person who's going to show them a life-changing thing that's going to bring them financial freedom, right? So that's your A list, right? And then your B list is more like acquaintances, right? So that'd be like the doctor you go to, people you work with who you aren't necessarily friends with, right? So it's just people that you know the name of and you know how to get contact with them, but you don't necessarily have a strong relationship with them, right? And you're going to be more likely to get these people in the business than your A list, right? And the other thing about the A list, you don't necessarily want these people. Like we want everyone to get in the business, but you don't necessarily want them to get in the business because they can be a distraction, right? You think about hanging out with your buddies, you're not necessarily productive, right? And it's going to be the same when you get in the business, right? Because those standards are set of productivity and it's extremely hard to change standards. It is possible though. So yeah, then that's your B list, it's your acquaintances, it's people you know but that you don't necessarily have a relationship with, right? And then you've got your C list, right? So your C list is people, it's the biggest list and it's the people you haven't met yet, right? Because you should be out there every day just meeting new people by habit. And if you haven't, you need to start, right? And it starts with a hello. So your C list is people that you haven't talked to or haven't met yet, right? And obviously that's going to be your biggest. And of the proportion in your business, the biggest amount of your business is going to be people you haven't met yet, right? Because you have the ability to set those standards wherever you want, right? And you do that by dressing well, talking well, stuff like that, right? So yeah, the four parts, right? So it starts with contacting. So if you're new to the business and you've made your list, it starts with the list and working your way through the list, which is the phone call, which is part 2. But for those of you that have run your list out kind of, it starts with contacting, right? So that's meeting people. I don't really like the word contacting because it definitely has like a connotation of fear with it for a lot of people. So I like to say meeting people, right? Because that's a lot less scary. You meet people every day when you're like going to the shops and like, you know, like when you go to a new program or something. You meet people every day going to uni, to school, stuff like that. So I like the connotation of meeting people rather than contacting, right? So that's number 1, and I'm just going to go over a few like hints of how to help you do that. Because you've been doing it your whole life, you shouldn't need me to give you a step-by-step guide, right? So the first thing is acknowledgement statements. A lot of people don't give acknowledgement statements when someone they're talking to says something, right? So if I'm just like, hey, how's your day? And then the person's just like, yeah, it's been not bad. Like I picked up my daughter from work and stuff like that. And you just go straight into another question, it feels like an interrogation and it'll begin to feel like an interrogation, regardless of what tone you use, right? So when someone says, oh, I just picked up my daughter from school, you go, oh, that's nice. And then you ask another question, right? So you've acknowledged what they said. They don't feel like they've just been dismissed with the answer that you wanted from them. Does that make sense? And then when you're talking to people and contacting or meeting people, there's basically a few questions that kind of need to be asked, right? So that starts with where are you from originally? So I'm just going to list them off. So where are you from originally? Do you like living here? What do you do for work? And do you have a family, right? And basically, you don't want to ask it the way I just said it, but you want to kind of slot it into conversation naturally, right? With acknowledgement statements, different questions. You basically want to come in and out of what your goal is, right? And yeah, so it all starts with a hey, and basically the point of those questions is to get them talking about themselves, right? So with the work thing, people are naturally going to complain. So that's an easy segue for you to be like, oh, well, I've got something, like I can show you if you want. But yeah, basically the point of those questions is to get people talking about themselves, right? Because people love to talk about themselves. And when you get them to talk about themselves, which is something they love, you get them to do something they love, they associate you with a good feeling and they'll like you more, right? And so they'll be more receptive to you when you call and when you basically book a meeting, right? And so yeah, if you're unsure of where to start, it just starts with a hey and a handshake, right? And in COVID times, like we all know, it starts with the COVID handshake, right? So the fist bump, the elbow bump, sorry. So yeah, once you've got people interested, this doesn't usually happen to like the plan. You can gauge that they're genuinely keen on what you're saying. You don't want to pull them in, right? You want to push them out. Because think about it like a doorway, right? If you try and push someone out, no matter what, it's so much harder to push someone out than it is to pull someone in, right? So you want to push them out because then they'll want to come in, right? Whereas if you pull, you kind of lose some posture, right? Because they'll start to even if they don't register it, they'll subconsciously start to be like, oh, I'm doing him a favor. And that'll kind of change the dynamic straight away. So by pushing, you make it more likely that they come in and you make it something they want more, right? And it gives you that posture in the dynamic of the relationship for them to start learning from you and be your protege, basically, right? And the other thing about pushing, when you push someone, is new contacts, people that you're not friends with, people on that C list, that third list, they know that once you leave that door, they will never see you again and they'll probably never get an opportunity like this again. They'll definitely never get an opportunity again like this from you, right? So it's kind of like a filtration process, right? So if you push them, right, by taking away the opportunity, being like, oh, yeah, I don't know that this is for you, I'm just gonna go, you don't seem like that receptive. If they immediately change up, then they're probably good for the business, right? Because they're smart enough to be like, oh, this guy actually has something that he's like not willing to share because I'm being like unreceptive and rude, right? So it's kind of a filtration process. So if you push them out and they don't do anything, you didn't really want them in your business to begin with, right? Because they're not smart enough to recognize what you've got for them, okay? And yeah, so pushing helps filter and builds posture, right? So you're the one with the cookie, right? I like to use that metaphor. You're the one with something to share. So why would you be doing them a favor in sharing your cookie? You're doing them the favor and they need to realize that, and you get that by pushing and building that posture, right? So yeah, after meeting people, you've got the phone call, right? So that's usually not the initial contact because you've already met them, but it's the initial contact after the initial contact. So it's a secondary contact and it's through the phone. And basically the objective of this is it's basically just to book a plan, right? It's to book like a meeting where you sit down and you discuss the business plan, right? And basically you just want to be friendly. So you want to come across as friends. So you'll go, hey John, how you going, man? And you'll build rapport and you'll talk about like how their day was, anything like that, right? And then you'll be like, well, yeah, like if you wanted to see, we could meet up. And then you give them 2 times and they'll tell you which is better for them, right? Never just ask someone what their schedule is. It's bad because it means that you're always available to them and you're there at their beck and call, and it's back to that posture thing, right? And yeah, so at the plan, you guys should all already have a pretty decent idea of how to do the plan. Basically, you just share the business strategy and what we're trying to accomplish. And before the plan, you want to strategize with your upline, right? Based on different personality types, you're going to do different things, right? And that comes to the follow-up as well. And if you show a plan to a member of a couple, you always want to show it to both people in the couple, right? Because otherwise they're just going to go home and they're going to tell their spouse what they saw, and their spouse is going to be like, well, that sounds dumb. Are you an idiot, right? And yeah, so some last thoughts are just make sure you can see the wood for the trees, right? And that's basically just seeing the bigger picture, having that dream in mind, and having a why for doing all the weird things we do, right? That's everything. Have a good night, guys.